Okay. Yeah, this picture, by the way, is a Q seed bank, and this kind of gasketed jar is available at Long's Drugs here in Hawaii. Advanced one. We've been talking about different ways of keeping plant material for propagation. One that we've just heard about is micropropagation. Let's go to the next slide. Another is to keep plants in the ground or to make cuttings, or keep plants in pots and use them as necessary. Why would we want to use seed storage instead of other plant propagation techniques? Well, this chart here shows various disadvantages and advantages of several plant sorry, I have a cold today. Several techniques for storing plant propagation material. The axis on the bottom left is plants under fairly natural conditions, like in the field. On the right, plants under rather artificial conditions, like in the greenhouse. Vertical, low-cost methods. Top, high-cost methods. So, for example, if you can just keep the plants in the field with no maintenance, it's a very low-cost, fairly natural method. If you have to take care of them, cultivate them, water them all the time in the field, it's a high-cost field method. If you look at these different methods in this chart, you'll see seed storage, seed banking is near the lower right. In other words, it's a relatively, on a per plant, per unit time basis, it's a very low-cost method of plant propagation material maintenance compared to, say, cultivation in the field, cultivation in the greenhouse, or tissue culture. So why would one use any of the other methods for maintaining plant propagation material? Well, seed banking has a couple of big disadvantages. One obviously is you can't get seeds from some plant. Less obviously, if you're dealing with plants for which clonal properties are important, you don't know what you're going to get from a seed, because a seed has two parents. It's got a father and a mother. And until it grows up, you don't know if it's going to be like the father plant or the mother plant. And for some things like fruits or ornamentals, this is important. Or things like ali'i, where you want a female plant and you don't want a male plant. You don't know what the seed is going to be. Third, and probably the most important reason you might want to consider another method of storing plant propagation material is that you can store some seeds, but you cannot store others. So let's go to the next slide. So most of this talk is going to be how to store seeds that can be stored. Here's an outline of the talk to follow. The next part of the talk, I'm going to give a lecture on the scientific principles of seed storage. And this is very dull and dry, but I think it's worth doing, because if I just tell you a method for storing seeds, then you'll know a method for storing seeds. If you know a little bit about the underlying principles, you can adapt your methods to your situation, or you can develop methods that are more suitable for yourself. After I explain the basic principles, then I'll talk a little bit about practical small-scale seed storage on a scale that you can do easily, describe some techniques and show you some equipment. I'll give a demonstration of seed storage on a very small scale. There'll be some time for questions, and there won't be enough time for questions to give you all the details of seed storage, but on the Hawaii Landscape website, I'll post two documents. One is a link to internet resources on seed storage, which has more than you'll ever want to know about seed banking. The other it'll be a set of do-it-yourself instructions. Before I get on to talking about the scientific principles of seed storage, just in case you fall asleep while I'm talking about it, I'll give you a short summary of practical seed storage at home. The two basic things you need are a place to work and a self-defrosting refrigerator. And to make a very long story short, you can prepare the seeds for storage by putting them in an open container in a self-defrosting refrigerator for about a month. Let them dry in the refrigerator, then pack them, store them, and that's all you have to do. Next slide. Okay, so first of all, now we're going to talk a little bit about the scientific principle of seed storage, as was discovered by a British scientist called E.H. Roberts about the middle of the last century. Next slide. Okay, next. Roberts divided seeds into two classes. One he called orthodox seeds. Those can be stored fairly easily. The other he called recalcitrant seeds. Recalcitrant because they're hard to store. The key difference between them, other than that you can store one and you can't store the other, is that orthodox seeds can be dried to very low moisture levels. And this is important because the drier they are, the longer they last. Secondly, orthodox seeds tolerate low temperatures. And this again is important because the cooler they are, the longer they last, and they tend to be somewhat long-lived anyway. So they can be stored by drying them down to very low moisture levels and keeping them at low temperatures, typically freezing. In contrast, recalcitrant seeds cannot be dried, and so you can't use drying as a technique for storing them, because as they dry, drying will kill the seeds. They also tend to be intolerant of low temperatures. They tend to lose viability quickly after ripening. They tend to be short-lived anyway. And although some of them can be stored, the storage tends to require species-specific methods. Now, most small dried seeds are orthodox. Examples are most typical temperate crop seeds like corn or radishes or wheat. Local examples of small dry seeds like koa or ali. Most large moist seeds, in fact just about anything bigger than a cashew, is likely to be recalcitrant. So you can't store mango seeds, you can't store avocado seeds, you can't store jackfruit seeds. On the next slide. As people did research on more seeds, they found some seeds that didn't quite fit in either category. These seeds could tolerate some drying, but after a certain point, the drying would kill the seeds, and they could tolerate some low temperature, but they couldn't tolerate very low temperatures. So there is some potential for storing these seeds, but not quite as much as for orthodox seeds, and you had to know what the cutoff temperature and the cutoff moisture level are. Some examples of seeds in this group are coffee or papayas. You can store seeds like this for a few years, but not for long periods of time, not like you can orthodox seeds. So quite reasonably we call these intermediate seeds. Okay, next. We can picture this conceptually like this. Hit the button one more time, Nellie. I'm trying to get an indicator. There should be a red marker that comes up over here. Okay. We can think of it this way. This horizontal axis is moisture level, percentage of water in the seed by weight. Vertical axis is the percentage of seeds you can germinate at that moisture level. The red line shows a typical recalcitrant seed. If you drop the moisture level too low, the seed will die. Next red line. Okay, this is a typical orthodox seed. You can just keep drying it, even at very low moisture levels, you still get good germination. Next line. Okay, intermediate seed, somewhere in between. You can drop the moisture level, but at a certain point, the seeds will die. Now there are a couple of other lines there. What those other lines show is that when an orthodox seed is not mature, depending on how immature it is, it will behave like a recalcitrant or intermediate seed. So this is important to know for in seed storage, because when we want to store seeds, we want them to last a long time. But even an orthodox seed won't store for a long time if you get it when it's not ripe, when the moisture level is still high. Next slide. And this is illustrated conceptually in this pair of graphs. The scale in these two graphs is this. The flower is pollinated over here, seed starts to form, that's time. So in the uppermost graph we see the flower is pollinated, seed starts to form dry material, proteins, carbohydrates, and whatnot. The dry material in the seed goes up at a point called, mass maturity. The dry mass of the seed is maximum. At the same time, moisture level is going down, and this curve there called equilibrium RH, that's how dry the seed is. When equilibrium relative humidity is high, the seed is mushy, and as equilibrium relative humidity goes low, then the seed becomes quite crisp. So that goes down as the seed matures. Now this lower graph here, the same scale at the bottom, time, pollination here, seed development. These graphs here, shows germination of the seed. Nothing can germinate until there's some material. So if the seed doesn't pick up the ability to germinate fresh, if you take a fresh seed and plant it right away, until it's accumulated a certain amount of dry weight. And as the dry weight goes up, the fresh germination goes up until it reaches a maximum near mass maturity. The ability of the seed to germinate after you dry it and then re-wet it, that develops a little bit later than fresh germination. No, the curve we're concerned about here is a dark black curve. That's longevity, the ability of the seed to be stored for a while and then germinate after long storage. And that develops later than the ability to germinate fresh or the ability to germinate dry. So when we want to store seeds, the point at which we want to collect them is somewhere around here, where the germination, where the seeds have reached their longevity peak. And I can't give you advice to do this. This is something you'll have to figure out yourself, knowing your plants. But basically, this usually takes place at about the point where the seed is ready to drop from the parent plant. Although there are quite a number of plants that require a little more ripening after the seed drops. Okay, next slide. Now I'd mentioned that the keys to storing orthodox seed are temperature and moisture level. This illustrates how this plays out for lettuce. Vertical scale here is seed life. On a log scale, it's stretched out, so it's 1 day, 10 days, 100 days, 1,000 days. Horizontal scale is percentage of water by total seed weight, 2.5% water, 5% water, 10% water, and so forth. The two curves there show the life of lettuce seeds at different temperatures. The upper curve is 25 degrees Celsius, 77 Fahrenheit, about the average temperature here. The lower line, 35 degrees Celsius, that's 95 degrees Fahrenheit, very warm. And what this shows is that as the moisture level of the seed goes up, the life in storage goes down. It's always lower, the storage life is always lower for the higher temperature. At 15% moisture level by weight, something strange seems to happen. You notice the storage life of the seed seems to be going up at that point at either temperature, but in either case, it's always the storage life is always longer for the lower temperature. Now, what's happening at 15% is to the right to the left, where the seed is dry, the seed is in suspended animation. So it's like potato chips in a shelf. The hotter it is, the faster they deteriorate. The more humid it is, the faster they deteriorate. To the right of 15%, the seed is coming back to life again because it's moist. So repair mechanisms start to repair the damage. So the black dots, you can see the storage life goes a little bit up as moisture level goes up. You see the white dots where the storage life continues to go down. That's because the black dots represent seeds stored with access to oxygen. The white dots, seeds stored without access to oxygen. The lesson to take back from this is that if you collect seeds are a living organism until you put them into storage, prepare them for storage, treat them like produce. Otherwise, if you collect them and treat them like this, you're going to reduce their long-term storage life. So as Nellie pointed out, field collection, how you deal with the seeds between field collection storage is quite important in determining how long you can ultimately keep them. Okay, next. And we're talking about life of a seeds. Now, if you say the storage life of a seed in a collection is 5 years, that doesn't mean that in the collection all the seeds last 4 years, 364 days, and at 5 years, 1 day, all the seeds are dead. Like people, in a group of seeds has a span of lives. So in a collection of, like people, they say the average person might live 75 years, but some people die naturally at 40 and others live to 100. Similarly for seeds. So this shows a hypothetical seed lot where seeds start dying after 1 year. At the 2-year point, you still have 98% of the seeds. About 15% of the seeds die after 2 years. In this particular collection, there's still a few very tough seeds left at 6 years. So how long would you say is the storage life of this seed? Well, the average seed storage life for these seeds is 3.5 years. Half the seeds are still alive at 4 years. But if you're storing these seeds for use in a collection, this little line here at 85%, that's 3 years. Why 85% when half the seeds are still alive at 4 years? The reason is, when you're storing seeds, you're selecting them. You're selecting them for longevity in a seed bank. And at the same time, you're selecting them for a lot of other things you probably don't know. So to keep the collection as much as possible, as representative as possible of the fresh seeds, you normally use them when the germination rate is still pretty high. Okay, next. I'd mentioned that the keys to storing seeds successfully are temperature and moisture level. Now this shows Typical air-dried seed in Hawaii has a moisture level of about 15%. Typical temperature in Hawaii is 25 degrees Celsius. If, let's say there's a seed that we could store for 1 month if we just put it in a paper bag on the shelf out on our porch. If we put them in a refrigerator, 5 degrees is typical temperature in your refrigerator, put them in an airtight container, that seed would be expected to last 8.8 months. If we put those seeds in a freezer, minus 18 degrees Celsius, 0 Fahrenheit, I wouldn't advise doing that because the seeds are still fairly moist. It's possible they might get some freezing damage. Let's take those same seeds and instead of refrigerating them, let's put them over silica gel, get them very dry. Put them in a sealed container, leave them at room temperature, but in a sealed container so they're very dry. We'd expect them to last about 16 months for 2 very simple measures for increasing seed life. Now let's suppose we first dried those seeds and then we put them in the refrigerator. So we dry them down to 8% moisture, then we put them in the refrigerator, 5 degrees Celsius. Now these 2 effects, they don't add, they multiply. So by both drying them and refrigerating them, we'd expect to increase their storage life by a factor of 143. So a seed that you could keep for a month in an open paper bag on your porch, you'd expect to be able to keep for about 12 years in the refrigerator if you prepared them properly. And if you froze them, you'd expect a storage life of something in the order of 50 or so years. Now, does this really work? That's next slide. Oops, there should be another slide after this. Next. So here's a real-life example. This is a monono, a native plant that used to be called Hediotis terminalis. The name is now Kadua affinis. This is a sample we collected on Manoa Cliff Trail back in 1997. This axis shows how long the seeds have been in storage in days. This shows the percentage germination of the seeds, and the different symbols show different storage methods. So the little white circles, number 1, those are seeds we put in a paper bag, I think it was, and we put outside in an insect-proof container so they were exposed to regular normal air temperature at Lyon Arboretum. Number 2, seeds at the same temperature but in a jar with silica gel, very dry. Number 3, in the refrigerator, open refrigerator. 4, in a refrigerator in a sealed container with desiccant, and 5 were frozen after we processed them. After 6 months, only about when they were fresh, we got 90% germination of the seeds. After 6 months, we could only germinate 1/3 of the seeds stored in the open. After a year, 2%. After 3 years, the stored seeds were all doing fine. This experiment's been going on for 15 years now. The number 3 and 4 refrigerated seeds are still doing just as well as when they were fresh. The number 2, room temperature, sealed with desiccant in a jar, those have gone down quite a bit. Number 5, the frozen seeds are starting to go down. So it really does work. I remember, this only works for orthodox seeds. So you might ask, for one thing, how many seeds are orthodox? Turns out the most seeds are. On a worldwide basis of 10,000 species for which we have information, 93% are orthodox, 1% are intermediate, and only about 5.5% are in the non-storable recalcitrant category. But when we look at tropical seeds, the picture's a little different. There really are quite a number of recalcitrant seeds among tropical plants. How do you know if a seed is orthodox or recalcitrant? You either have to do the research or look it up in a database. Here's how you find the database. The handout that I'm going to post on the landscape industry website will have instructions on how to find this database and how to use it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm going to show a couple of pictures of different seed banks. This is the USDA National Seed Bank at Fort Collins, Colorado. They call it the Fort Knox of American Agriculture. Conditions inside that seed bank where they want to keep seeds like a gold reserve. They want to try to keep them as long as possible, decades. Conditions inside the seed bank, temperature 0 degrees, same as in your home freezer, same as in the freezer compartment of your refrigerator. Next. This is the Thai National Rice Seed Bank in Pathum Thani, Thailand. Temperature here is 50 degrees. It's actually warmer than your home refrigerator. And these seeds are going to be used for breeding projects in the next few years. So the maximum longevity, like in the first slide, isn't quite so important. The refrigerator temperature is quite tolerable for these. In a self-defrost refrigerator, moisture level is just about right for seed storage. So if you're going to use a self-defrost refrigerator to store seeds, Ziploc bags are fine. But in a walk-in refrigerator like this, the humidity is very high, so they have to keep their seeds in airtight containers once they're dried for storage. Next slide. Here's a closer-up view of the airtight containers. Get exactly the same kind of containers at Long's Drugs. You can get the gaskets at kitchen supply stores. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Here's seed storage on a much smaller scale. This is a little miniature seed bank that Kew Garden makes for home seed storage. It's no longer available, but I can give you a demonstration here and tell you a little bit how to make one by yourself. Okay, next slide. This is the seed bank at Lyon Arboretum. Our whole seed bank fits in one 250 square foot room with a 200 square foot office, and all the seeds are in 2 refrigerators and a freezer, one of which isn't in this picture. The black things on the right are the seed drying cabinets. I think that might be, that's one more slide, yeah. Okay, guidelines for successful seed storage. These are going to be in the handout on the landscape website, and all of these are they are in much more detail. So the key steps to successful seed storage are, first of all, determine if the seeds can be stored, because it's no sense trying to store seeds like mangoes or lychees. You can't store them. Collect healthy ripe seeds, because if they're not healthy, they're not ripe, they won't last very long. Separate and clean them, dry them to the correct moisture level, and that you can do either using a device like this, or here in Hawaii, the air inside a self-defrost refrigerator is naturally just about the right humidity for drying seeds. At the same time, germinate some to see if they're good, because there's no sense storing them if the seeds are no good in the first place. And that'll also give you a benchmark further down the road, a few years down the road, to see whether the seeds are storing properly. Pack the seeds for storage. This can be simple. If you're storing them in a self-defrost refrigerator, you can just put them in Ziploc bags and leave them in the refrigerator. If you're storing them some other way, then you'll have to put them in airtight containers. Store the seeds. For most of your purposes, where you're not looking at decades of storage, again, the refrigerator is the most straightforward way to do it. If you store the seeds for a long time, you should take a few of them. That's to say more than a few years. You should take some out and germinate them. And when you do germinate them, there are some special techniques for germinating seeds that have been stored this way. You don't just sow them and then sprinkle water on them. That's explained in some detail in the handout. And then sow the seeds. When you're doing all of this, keep good records, because that's how you learn from experience, how you learn to store seeds better in the future. Next slide. Okay, that's the end. Now, that's not quite the end of the presentation, though, because I want to do a small demonstration here. This, just to my knowledge, is the world's smallest seed bank. A Kew Garden miniature seed bank, and all it is really is a plastic box and airtight lid. Instructions. You can get instructions down line. Got some desiccant, silica gel. Got some small dishes for drying the seeds. Small plastic containers for storing. And the key to this system is the indicator silica gel. You see there's one is yellow, one is green. It's actually exactly the same. The difference between the yellow and the green is simply that the green is hydrated, yellow is dry. The way this system works is this is desiccant silica gel, goes in the bottom of this pack. You sprinkle you sprinkle the yellow silica gel on top to make, and that tells you that the silica gel in here is dry and it can be used for drying. Sprinkle the seeds in this little dish. Put the dish in here on top of the silica gel, and you sprinkle the green hydrated silica gel in another dish and put that dish next to the seeds. Now the seeds are going to let water off into the air inside the box, and the silica gel is going to pick it up. As long as the seeds are releasing water into the air, the silica gel stays green. When the seeds are completely dry, the silica gel will pull all the air out from the box, and this green will turn to yellow. If you know the seeds are dry, you can take them out, seal them, and put them into storage. After a while, the silica gel in the box will have picked up all the moisture it can. It can't pick up any more moisture. The yellow silica gel you poured on top of the dried silica gel is going to turn green, so you know you take it out, bake it until this silica gel turns yellow again, and you can keep doing this over and over and over again. So it's very simple. Now, where do you get this from? You can't get it anymore. They don't make them anymore. But you can order these from quite a number of places actually. You can order them from Amazon, or is it Amazon? Yeah, I've forgotten. Yeah, I think so. Or you can order it from a place called Southern Exposure Seed with instructions of how to order from Southern Exposure on the handout. If you don't want to deal with silica gel, again, the simplest way to store seeds at home, and it's nearly as effective as using a set like this, is to get a plastic box with an airtight lid. Flatter and wider than this is better. Sprinkle the seeds in a very thin layer on the bottom, and put it in the refrigerator, in the back of the refrigerator, but leave the lid off. Leave the seeds in the refrigerator for about 1 month, and after a month, grab the lid, open the door of the refrigerator very quickly, and put the lid right on. Now, take the box out of the refrigerator, put it someplace, and just wait for a while until the box comes to room temperature. When the box comes to room temperature, you do this because if you don't wait till the box comes to room temperature, the seeds will get moist from condensation because they're cold, right? And then you undo all the effects of that 1 month of drying. So now when the seeds have come to room temperature, open the box again and pour them in the storage container. If you're going to store them in someplace other than a refrigerator, you need something that has a rubber gasket or it's perfectly airtight. If you're just going to store them in a refrigerator, the refrigerator is a very dry environment, so you can just put them in a Ziploc bag and put them back in the refrigerator. Most straightforward way to do is store seeds. If you want to store them for a much longer period, like decades, it's best to freeze. Most seeds store better frozen, and that's a little more complicated. If you want to know how to do that, you can contact me or look at the information on the handout. But for home storage, for storage short spans of a few years, refrigerated technique is by far the easiest, requires the least equipment, and it's very effective. But at that I'll end, and if you have any technical questions, I'm going to hang around for the session afterwards, so you can catch me on the side.